The tension between Maurice Scott and Marsau Scott did not come out of nowhere. It had been building for a long time, and in this moment, everything finally reached a point where it could no longer be ignored. What made this situation different from their usual conversations was the tone. This was not light shade. This was not playful disagreement. This was frustration that had been sitting for too long, finally coming out in a direct and serious way. Maurice was not approaching this conversation as just a brother or a friend. He was coming in as someone whose name, reputation, and business were now being affected. That changes everything. When business gets involved, especially something tied to timelines, money, and public image, people stop being patient. And that is exactly what we saw here. Maurice had reached a point where he could not keep making excuses for Marsau anymore. Marsau, on the other hand, came into the conversation with a very different energy. He was calm, almost too calm, as if the situation was not as serious as it actually was. He was explaining things in a way that made it seem like delays were normal, like everything just needed more time. But the problem with that approach is simple. Time had already passed. Not a few weeks, not a couple of months, but over a year. That is not a small delay. That is something that can damage trust completely. As Maurice looked around the project site, his frustration became even more clear. He was not just listening to explanations. He was seeing the lack of progress with his own eyes. And that made it harder for him to accept anything Marsau was saying. Because when words do not match reality, people start to lose patience very quickly. Marsau tried to defend himself by explaining the technical side of things. He talked about drawings, structural changes, permits, and how every small adjustment takes time. And while that may be true in general, the issue here was not just about technical delays. It was about communication. If there were delays, why were they not clearly explained earlier? Why did Maurice have to come and ask instead of being updated along the way? That is where the real problem started to show. It was not just about the project being unfinished. It was about the lack of accountability. Maurice made it clear that his name was attached to this project. That means he had already made promises to other people. People were expecting results. People were waiting. And when those expectations are not met, it reflects badly on him, not just Marsau. Marsau's response to that pressure did not help the situation. Instead of fully acknowledging the issue, he started to push back. He suggested that Maurice did not fully understand what goes into construction projects. That kind of response can come across as dismissive, especially when the person you are talking to is already frustrated. What made things worse was the tone shift during the conversation. At one point, Marsau made a comment telling Maurice to step out of his soft hands era and get more involved. That moment changed the energy completely. It was no longer just about the project. It became personal. You could see it on Maurice's face. That comment did not land well at all. From Maurice's perspective, that comment likely felt disrespectful. He was already dealing with delays, already dealing with pressure. And now he was being told that he was not doing enough. That is not something most people would accept calmly, especially in a business situation where they are the one being affected. As the conversation continued, it became clear that Maurice was trying to stay focused on one thing: results. He was not interested in long explanations anymore. He wanted to know when the project would be done. He wanted clear answers, and he was not getting them. Marsau kept going back to explanations about process and complications, but Maurice kept bringing the conversation back to accountability. That back and forth showed the difference in their priorities. Marsau was focused on defending the situation, while Maurice was focused on fixing it. At a certain point, the frustration reached a level where staying in the conversation no longer made sense for Maurice. You could see that he was done going in circles. When someone feels like they are not being heard or respected, walking away becomes the only option. And that is exactly what he did. That moment, when Maurice decided to leave, said more than anything else in the conversation. It showed that the situation had gone beyond discussion. It had reached a breaking point. Because walking away is not something people do when they still believe the conversation will lead to a solution. Looking at Marsau's position, it is also important to understand that he may not see the situation the same way. From his perspective, he might feel like he is dealing with real challenges that are outside of his control. Construction projects can be complex. Delays can happen. But even if that is true, the way those challenges are communicated matters just as much as the challenges themselves. If Marsau had been more transparent from the beginning, if he had clearly explained the delays and set new timelines, the situation might not have escalated this far. But when communication is weak, small problems turn into big ones very quickly. Another layer to this situation is the fact that this is happening between family members. That makes everything more complicated. In business, people can separate emotions and focus on contracts and results. But when family is involved, emotions always play a role. Respect, trust, and history all become part of the equation. Maurice likely expected a higher level of accountability because of that relationship. He trusted Marsau not just as a contractor, but as someone close to him. And when that trust is tested, the reaction is always stronger. At the same time, Marsau may feel pressure in a different way. Being expected to deliver not just as a professional, but also as a family member can create its own kind of stress. But again, how that pressure is handled makes all the difference. The situation also reflects a bigger pattern that viewers have noticed. There have been multiple conversations where Marsau and Tisha Scott discuss other people's business while keeping their own issues more private. That contrast becomes more noticeable when situations like this come to light. It creates a sense of imbalance. When someone is quick to question others but slow to address their own problems, people start to see them differently. And that perception can affect how every action is interpreted moving forward. Another important point is the timing. This confrontation did not happen early in the delay. It happened after a long period of inaction. That means frustration had time to build. And when frustration builds over time, it does not come out calmly. It comes out all at once. Maurice's reaction was not just about one conversation. It was about everything that had happened leading up to that moment. Every missed update, every delay, every unanswered question added to the reaction we saw. Marsau's approach, on the other hand, seemed to rely on the idea that things would eventually work out. But in business, eventually is not enough. People need timelines. People need updates. People need to feel like progress is being made. The difference between those two mindsets is what caused the clash. Maurice needed certainty. Marsau was offering explanations. And those two things do not always meet in the middle. As the situation moves forward, the real question is not just whether the project will be completed, it is whether the trust between them can be repaired. Because once trust is broken in a business situation, it is very difficult to rebuild. If Marsau wants to fix the situation, it will require more than just finishing the project. It will require consistent communication, clear timelines, and a willingness to take full responsibility for what happened. Without that, even if the project is completed, the relationship may not fully recover. For Maurice, the next steps will likely be about protecting his own reputation and making sure that situations like this do not happen again. That could mean setting stricter boundaries, being more involved, or even choosing to work with different people in the future. This moment also serves as a reminder of how important professionalism is, even in personal relationships. Mixing business with family can work, but only if both sides treat the situation with the seriousness it deserves. At the end of the day, this was not just an argument about a project. It was a moment that revealed deeper issues. Issues of communication, accountability, trust, and respect. And those are not things that can be fixed overnight. The outcome of this situation will depend on what happens next, whether both sides are willing to reflect, adjust, and move forward in a different way. Because if nothing changes, the same problems will continue to appear again and again. And that is what makes this moment so important. It is not just about what happened. It is about what it means moving forward.